Most people think Junmai, Ginjo, and Daiginjo are quality rankings. They're not. And if you keep getting that wrong, you're gonna keep buying sake that you don't actually enjoy. And I can definitely understand, because I was definitely confused by this at first too. I thought Daiginjo was basically the premium, the best of the best, and everything that wasn't just neatly, kind of filed under as lesser premium sake. But then I found out sake doesn't actually work like that. And pretty much like everything else, it's a lot more complicated than you'd naturally assume. As I started learning more about sake, I came to the realization that these words aren't supposed to describe quality. They're just supposed to be indicators to let you know what's in the bottle. All right, so what we're gonna do is go over Junmai, Ginjo, Daiginjo, what those words mean, and how they can actually help inform you on the flavor profile of a sake. And then I'm gonna show you how to take those indicators and actually make better sake purchasing decisions. And by the end of the video, you'll be able to look at any bottle of sake, understand what these words actually mean and what they're actually trying to communicate to you, so you can always make the informed buying decision and get the sake profiles that you truly enjoy. All right, so cutting to the chase, here's the easiest way to understand it. Junmai tells you about the ingredients. Ginjo and Daiginjo, they tell you about how refined the rice grains are. In other words, think about the phrase potato chip. Potato is telling you the ingredient. Chip is telling you what's been done to the potato. So before we go further into breaking down those terms, let me just introduce the bottle for this video, and I will show you the front while I read from the back. And it is the Kagatobi Moroka Nama, and it is brewed and bottled by the Fukumitsuya Sake Brewery. I do not see the region on this. Maybe it's Ishikawa. Actually, I think that might be the region, Ishikawa. So Kagatobi is the brand for this specific sake that they brew, and Moroka in the name means that this is unfiltered. So like for my whiskey folks, I know I make a lot of whiskey references, but this is basically like a non-chill filtered sake. And Nama means it's unpasteurized. So again, sake is a brewed drink. So just like beer can be pasteurized or unpasteurized, this specific sake is unpasteurized. The alcohol content is 15.9 to 16.9%. So a small range instead of the exact number. And this is a Junmai. So it doesn't explicitly say the polishing ratio that I'm able to see. Maybe if I take off this other sticker. But it's more than likely 60% or higher. Yeah, and it's actually empty. I was supposed to, save a little bit of this for the video, but I'm only human, so. But yeah, I'll try and leave this in frame. That is this sake, the Kagatobi Moroka Nama. All right, so back to the words, Junmai. If you see Junmai on a bottle, kind of like you see on this one, that is a reference to the ingredients of the sake. And that just means that there's only 4 ingredients that went into making the sake, and that's water, rice, yeast, and koji mold. If a bottle doesn't say Junmai, that likely means a small amount of distilled alcohol was added during the brewing process. This style of sake is called Honjozo, and it's really just another way to shape aroma, texture, and finish, and it's a stylistic choice by the toji or the brewmaster. Some of the most impressive sake in the world are Honjozo, so they are definitely not some subcategory. Now, if you only see Junmai on the bottle and you don't see Ginjo or Daiginjo, you can probably expect this to have a polishing ratio of 61% or higher, and it's more than likely gonna have a fuller mouthfeel, more on the savory side as far as the flavor profile. You're gonna get a lot more of that umami savory notes. Maybe if it's on the, closer to that 61, 62, you may still get a bit of that fruitiness, especially with some of these like namas where they just got a lot of expression, and you can probably still get a wide range of flavors on those Junmais. As already stated, Ginjo and Daiginjo refer to how much of the rice has already been polished away. This is represented as the rice polishing ratio and is usually in the form of a percentage on a bottle. Rice polishing is the process to get rid of the outer husk of the rice grains, mostly made of protein and fat, to get towards the starchy center. The starchy center is called shimpaku, which loosely translates to white heart. Ginjo means 60% or less of the original rice grain remains, and Daiginjo means 50% or less of the original rice grain remains. And remember, the number you see on the bottle next to rice polishing ratio is always an indication of what's actually remaining after polishing. I used to mix this up all the time and not remember if it was what was polished away or if it was what was left. At this point, you might be thinking more polishing always equals better sake, but as I already said, this is where a lot of people start to go wrong. That's kind of like thinking that older wine is always better than some younger wine. And if you drink wine at all, you know that's not always true. And again, this is a very reasonable assumption because if you start to look online for some of the most ultra premium sakes, they're pretty much all exclusively Daiginjos. But this is more of a reflection on the effort that it takes to make some of these bottles, like getting some of these polishing ratios down to like sub 20%, sub 10%, and not a direct reflection on how much you'll actually enjoy them. And so to think that the rice polishing ratio is solely what makes one bottle of sake better than the other is really just to not understand what rice polishing is kind of altogether. But after learning the difference of Daiginjo and Ginjo, you might be thinking, well, why isn't all sake at least Ginjo or Daiginjo? But that's because polishing isn't just to make one sake more premium than the other. It's to create a specific profile, a specific experience altogether with each bottle. To think that every sake should be either a Daiginjo or a Ginjo or to have some minimum or maximum polishing ratio is like thinking every wine should be at least, 10 years old, or every beer should be an IPA, or every whiskey should be high rye. Like every one of these expressions of these spirits or drinks, they all serve a different purpose. They're not really directly similar to their other variants. This is why Daiginjos aren't like the de facto best of sake, because everybody's palates are different, everybody's preferences are different, and you'll start to figure out what you really like as you explore sake a bit more. You may come to the realization that you like Junmais a lot better than the more fruity and light and aromatic Daiginjos. Or you might like kind of somewhat the middle ground a lot of times of the Ginjos that kind of give you a little bit of the best of both worlds. At the end of the day, this comes down to preference. Quality isn't really the focus here. So I'm curious, when you're out at a liquor store or at a Japanese restaurant and you're looking at the sake list, are you picking a Daiginjo because you want something premium for that time? Or are you picking your sakes based on the profile and maybe like, just overall experience that you actually, are more inclined towards? Let me know in the comments below, because I really just want to know how people are picking sake, especially once you're a little bit more familiar with Daiginjo and Ginjo and Junmai. All right, so let's take everything we've learned about Junmai, Ginjo, and Daiginjo and use that to really explain what you should expect to experience as far as profile and taste when you are exploring these three different types of sake. Ginjos and Daiginjos, these are usually very light and aromatic, and a lot of them have those notes of like melon, pear, sometimes banana, or what I like to call like just drinkable juicy fruit. If anybody's ever actually, chewed a stick of juicy fruit gum, that's a lot of what you kind of can expect from some of these Ginjos and Daiginjos. They also usually have a pretty clean, crisp, like mouthfeel and finish as well. The finish is usually pretty quick on Ginjos and Daiginjos. These are generally the sake that I recommend giving to somebody who's never really tried sake outside of, hot sake, or just kind of on the whim, let me just grab a bottle of Gekigan at a grocery store or a gas station. And most people just haven't tried these styles of sake unless you really went out of your way to do so. And as I already stated, Junmais, so those sake with 60%, well, higher than 60% polishing ratios, those are the ones that are going to be more dynamic, more rice forward more often than not. But especially if it's closer to that 61, 64-ish range, not so much like 75 or higher. You may still get some of those like fruity notes if it's, you know, closer to that 60 or so. But they generally do have more of those umami notes on the nose and on the palate. They have a longer finish, more viscosity because, you know, the polishing ratio is a higher number. So you have more of those proteins and fats that didn't necessarily get polished away. So I think that lends to that, you know, kind of more viscous mouthfeel. So the key takeaway is this: Junmai tells you about the ingredients. Daiginjo and Ginjo, they tell you about how much rice was polished away in the brewing process. None of these words are indicators of quality or exactly how much more you're gonna enjoy a bottle, especially when it comes to the polishing ratio. They just tell you what kind of experience you should expect from the bottle. In the next video, I'm gonna show you the banger $30 bottles and below. These are gonna be some of my personal favorites that I've had, and most people will be able to find in just about most markets, especially if you're near a Total Wine, so you don't want to miss that one. And if you enjoy exploring the world of sake, definitely consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, we'll keep sipping, we'll keep learning. Kanpai.